Last week was primary election day throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. With the results now in, there are some surprises heading into November. What does this mean for Pennsylvania in November? What does this mean for the governor's agenda? And what does it mean as we look toward 2020? I'll be joined by John Cole, managing editor of PoliticsPA, to break down these election results. It's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm your host, Sam Chen. Last week was Election Day in Pennsylvania. Throughout the state, primary voters went to the polls, and now the results are in. So what were those results? What does that mean for Pennsylvania moving forward? And let's take a sneak peek at the 2020 presidential primaries coming to the state. I'm joined tonight by managing editor of PoliticsPA and frequent guest on our show, John Cole. John, thanks so much for coming back.
Thanks for having me as always, Sam.
It is such a pleasure to have you on here talking politics. Pennsylvania primary has happened, and we are now looking at the aftermath, some surprises, and we'll be taking a look at what this means going forward for the state. And of course, what everyone wants to know is what does this mean for 2020? But let's start with the only statewide race this year, which is for the Superior Court of Pennsylvania. And that's the second highest court in the state. It's the first appellate court, second highest court in the state, just as under the state Supreme Court. Two spots up. We've got three candidates on the Republican side, three on the Democrat side that ran the primary. Break down for me what happened.
Exactly. So like you mentioned, the parties endorsed two candidates going into it. So whether you were a Democrat or Republican this time around when you went to the polls, you were able to vote for two. So not just one candidate,
right.
Two. The state parties, both of the state party endorsed candidates were victorious. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, it was kind of a nail biter, quite frankly. Both races didn't get called until around after midnight on election day. So this is hours after the polls closed. But the Democrats, they're both candidates that are going forward for them is Amanda Green Hawkins, a former Allegheny County councilor, and she was also a former superdelegate a couple years ago.
For the DNC?
Yeah, in 2016, she was one of the 19 or 20 superdelegates in that year. She was the top vote getter for the whole thing between the Democratic and Republican primary. She kind of cruised, and it was known rather earlier in the night that she was going to be one of the two nominees.
Sure.
And then the fight for second and third, so the fight for the last spot between the Democrats was pretty interesting, and again, not called until just after midnight when the party sent out their official press release stating the victor there, and that was Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas Judge Dan McCaffrey. Some may recognize the last name because his brother, Seamus McCaffrey, he served on the state Supreme Court before as well. McCaffrey also received the party endorsement. He was out of the three candidates in that race, he was the lone candidate from Philadelphia. Green Hawkins, and the person who finished third, Beth Tarasi, who is an attorney in Allegheny County.
Both from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, exactly. Both Green Hawkins and Tarasi. So again, the party got what they wanted, where both of their endorsed candidates won. But having said that, it was rather close.
Sure.
McCaffrey edged out Tarasi by 2.5 points.
Wow.
Both candidates were on TV in the last week of the campaign. So again, even though the party got what they wanted there, it still was it was a nail biter there. Yeah. And interestingly enough, on the Republican side, somewhat similar circumstances actually, where again both endorsed candidates on the Republican side won at their previous state committee meeting. They endorsed Megan King, who's from Chester County, prosecutor there, and then Cumberland County Judge Christy Lee Peck. So both of those candidates were endorsed at the party. This time around, King was the top vote getter for the Republicans. She was successful. I think, again, rather early in the night, she was getting a rather comfortable lead, so it was pretty clear a couple hours in that she was going to be at least on the ballot.
At least one of the two.
Yeah, at least one of the two. But that fight for second, like the Democrats, was rather close. Peck edged out Warren. Rebecca Warren, former Montour County District Attorney, ran without the party blessing, without the party endorsement.
And without the Bar Association.
Yeah, correct.
Recommendation.
Exactly. And Warren actually, this is not the first time she's run for statewide without the party endorsement. So she's done this before. But it was close. It's worth noting that, interestingly enough, Peck ended up edging her out by around 2.5 points as well.
After midnight.
Yeah, so again, quite literally within a 15-minute stretch, both parties sent out their official press release stating who the two candidates would be in November. But again, it was certainly not a breeze for those who just edged by McCaffrey and Peck. It had to be a bit of a nail biter for them. But having said that, they are the ones that are going to go on to November's election. Again, out of the 4, so there will be 4 people on that ballot. It's no longer a primary in November.
Right.
So you could be a Democrat and vote for both Republicans. You could be a Republican and vote for both Democrats. It doesn't matter.
Or split the ticket.
Yeah, or split. Correct. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're not running hand in hand.
Right.
That's a very good point that you mentioned there. But having said that, it's going to go to the top 2 vote getters. So it's not a ticket race. It's going to go to the top 2.
That's a great clarification. It's not like the presidential election where the president and vice president run together.
And like the governor and lieutenant governor.
Correct.
Too.
Correct.
It's a same thing where, in theory, that could be split. And again, you're not bound by party where the primary, you had to choose between those 2. And of course, independents in Pennsylvania are boxed out of the primary due to our closed primary system.
Right.
But in November's general election, I think it'll actually be somewhat highly publicized too, because that's really the only statewide big election in 2019.
Right.
And I guess we could touch on this a bit, where Meghan King actually, which is quite interesting, President Donald Trump, hours after his rally in Montoursville, Pennsylvania, Monday night, the night before the Pennsylvania primary, tweeted his endorsement for King. And that is, now, we see Trump tweets often endorsing certain candidates, but usually it's at the federal level. Usually it's for senator, governor, Congress,
Fred
etc.
Keller, for example. He endorsed Fred Keller.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's not a surprise. But for a race, for a judicial race in Pennsylvania, that, I think, it caught a lot of people off guard. And I think it's a lot of Trump people will say that they gave her an extra boost that she needed because she finished first in the Republican primary. Do we know definitively how much of an impact his tweeted endorsement made? We don't know for sure. But of course, Trump team can market that as a win. And of course, King has to be thankful that she finished first. You know?
Why do you think he endorsed King and not Peck? They were both endorsed by the state GOP.
That is correct. It's tough to say. I guess one would suppose that maybe the Republican Party was more afraid that King was not going to get, maybe they thought King was going to get beat out by Warren, who again has run insurgent campaigns before. And maybe that was the boost she needed. I don't.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
We don't know for certain, but we can say that it was not the norm. Again, Trump likes to use Twitter to his advantage and tweet out endorsing various candidates, but so rare. And I don't know any time in recent memory he did it for a judicial race. So I guess he looked at it as a favor for King, and King was the top vote getter for the Republicans. So she's in a good spot now. At least she can market herself going into the final months of this campaign, saying, "Hey, I was the top vote getter for the Republicans. Trump endorsed me." Yet she's from Chester County, which is, obviously the more moderate Republican wing of the state. So she can try to pull voters from there and yet tout her Trump endorsement. That's something I guess she'll try to use to her advantage going into November.
Let's stay on the judges for a moment here. So going into November, as you said, both parties have 2 candidates each. They're running for 2 spots, so it'll be choose from 4. How do you think the tightness of the races will play in November?
I guess it ultimately comes down to voter turnout, and that's not just a cop-out, it's the truth, where it depends what party's more energized to go to the polls then, what big races are going to go on in November that gets people off of their couches, because like me and you have talked before, and even before the 2018 midterm, and that obviously has a lot more interest. In November, how many people are going to really be energized and go to the polls? So I think a lot of your passionate political people will go to the polls. If we want to look at the most recent data from this past election, the top 2 vote getters were actually both Democrats, where Green Hawkins and McCaffrey, they had more votes than the highest vote getter for Republicans, which was King. So I think that's noteworthy, at least on its face, that one can make the case maybe Democrats are just more energized to go to the polls in the primary. We'll see if it happens in November, but at least going into that right now, they can hang their hat on that they were the highest vote getters in the primary.
Do you think how the voters for Taurasi or the voters for Warren will come around and support their party's nominees, or is there a bit of a rebellious streak here that says, well, I'm not happy with the way it went, I'm going to sit this one out? Or maybe, if you're a supporter of Taurasi, you say, well, I'm going to vote for the other Pittsburgher, but I won't vote for the Philly judge. Do you see any of that potentially coming into play?
That's plausible. I think when voters go to the poll, they tend to vote for what they know and who's, like, I guess, the region of the state they're from. So McCaffrey boasted very good numbers in Philadelphia, but obviously he didn't duplicate those same numbers in Allegheny County, where Green Hawkins and Taurasi are both from. And I guess you could touch on the Republican side. Warren has run before without the party endorsement, and she comes from a more conservative part of the state. I think it's plausible to think that some may sit it out, or maybe they'll vote for just one candidate and not the other. That's possible. The margins we're not aware of, and we don't know how big of an impact it will have. But one can certainly assume that certain passionate voters for these people might think, I'll always vote for one candidate, but not both. Sometimes I guess there's hard feelings in primaries, not just with this race, but with other races. In different elections where certain your candidate in the primary lost, so you're going to hold that against. Even though you share the same party and most likely you share similar ideals, sometimes there's bad blood after a primary. I don't know how much bad blood there is right now. I don't know exactly, but to some voters, maybe they will carry that grudge on to November's election.
Last question on the judges. We obviously odd year elections. In Pennsylvania, the turnout goes much, much, much lower. And our viewers have several months that they can look up the judges, see where they stand before they have to go to the polls. We can't emphasize how important it is, our judiciary system, how important it is that we elect good judges. What would you say to a voter who may normally sit out in an election year like 2019 about getting to the polls?
I know I sound like a broken record here, but all elections matter.
Yes.
And I would tell them that even though this is not going to be as highly publicized, I very much doubt you're going to go to various parts of the state and see a lot of lawn signs and things of that nature. So quite frankly, if you really want to follow this race closely, you almost have to go out of your way to do so. It's not like these candidates are going to be on TV months and months in advance, Maybe we'll see TV ads like this past primary. There was ads on the last week of the campaign. So quite frankly, if you do want to follow this race, you're going to have to really kind of look into it. But having said that, luckily we're in a great information age, in my opinion, that a lot of this information is accessible not only through your local paper may not report on it as closely, but if you have access to the internet, you can go online and check out both candidates' platforms on their campaign website and various Pennsylvania political outlets like PoliticsPA.com, which I'm the managing editor there. I guarantee we will be covering exactly, but we will be websites like us and other political outlets will be making a point to follow this race because again, it doesn't get the same publicity as some of the other elections that are between governor, things of that nature. The courts don't exactly get that same attention, even though that's not right per se. It's still important. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. John, thank you again for taking the time. We talked about the judicial races statewide. Again, our viewers have months to look into these judges before we have to go to the polls, and it is incredibly important to vote for judges here in Pennsylvania, even though it's not as publicized as other races. Last Tuesday, there was also a series of special elections throughout Pennsylvania. One congressional race, which you've been on a show talking about before, where now Congressman-elect Fred Keller won, is headed down to Washington, but also 2 state Senate races and a state House race. Talk to me briefly about the state races and what it does for the makeup of the Republican and Democrats in each house.
So I guess if you want to touch on the special elections in Harrisburg first, we can do that, where there was 2 special elections for the state Senate, like you touched on. They all were held by Republicans previously, so all 3 seats that were in the state legislature were held by Republicans in heavy Republican areas, and they were retained by Republicans. So no big surprises there. Kind of the results were what a lot of pollsters and pundits thought it would be. So let's talk, I guess we could talk about in South Central Pennsylvania and the 33rd Senatorial District, Rich Alloway.
Senator Alloway.
Yeah, he retired in February, at the end of February, and that race opened up again. That's a heavy GOP district that has been represented by a Republican for decades. That seat went to Doug Mastriano. He bested Sarah Hammond, who was involved in their local government down there. Mastriano was a former Army colonel, and he previously sought office before for Congress. He bowed out after, I think he was in a primary, but never made it past a primary. Point being, though, he sought office before. This time, after being selected by the Republican committee and in such a heavy GOP district, that was a cakewalk for him.
Sure.
He won by a very, very wide margin. Out in Indiana County, where the other senatorial special election was, that was represented by Don White. He was in there longer than Alloway. White was in there since he was first elected in 2000.
Oh, wow.
So he had nearly 2 decades in the state Senate. He was replaced by his former chief of staff, so it's kind of, his boss, his former boss's seat. He's taken over. That is Joe Pittman. Pittman won by a rather substantial margin as well in that race. Again, the Democrat Susan Bozer. She also tried making a run for office before for another seat. I believe it may have been Congress, but point being, she didn't make it out of a primary. She's a professor at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She was unsuccessful as well. And again, Pittman won that by a rather wide margin as well. The state house race was a little more interesting, I think. That contained a Republican area where the state representative, Brian Ellis, left amid sexual assault investigation, which is ongoing right now. After he resigned, a special election was called to fill that seat. The Republican that was picked by the committee there was Marcy Mustello. She worked for Congressman Mike Kelly, worked in his office for a while. She was the GOP candidate. She was successful. She won by around 18 to 16 points. She beat out Democrat Sam Doctor. Interestingly enough, Doctor previously sought this seat. In 2008. Yeah, so it's interesting. So Doctor ran for this seat in 2018. He is not a medical doctor. That's his last name. He is a steel worker, for those wondering. But yeah, because his campaign lawn signs, I think, was get a doctor in the house or something along those lines. But Doctor ran as an independent, he ran as an independent in 2018, lost by a lot to Ellis. He ran as a Democrat this time in a special election in Butler County. Was closer, but Mustello won by a rather comfortable margin, again, 18 points. But they were the 3 special elections. How it affects Harrisburg, I don't think it's a world difference, just because those seats were previously represented by Republicans. And it's not like the majority super narrow, where it's only a seat or 2, where those couple months without them in, it would have made a huge impact, where it's kind of going back to the way things were. If you're a Republican, you're happy, and it's quite frankly not a surprise. It was what was expected that happened in those races. Now, having said that, we saw earlier this year a state Senate seat was flipped from former State Senator Guy Reschenthaler's seat. Went after he was elected to Congress, that seat opened up, and then Pam Iovino, a Democrat, took that seat out in Allegheny County. So that was a bigger story because that flipped a seat. These seats, it remains everything the way it was before those 3 representatives stepped away, and they all resigned in the past couple of months. So it was only a couple month period in which they were not representing their district.
Yeah, and to your point, the Democrats have made pretty good gains in 2018. House Republicans held over 120 seats prior to 18. They have 110 now. They held at one point 34 Senate seats. They now have 28. So to your point, this is very much a hold for the Republicans.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this about, there were several surprises on Tuesday night as well. These were not, but you've mentioned there's several surprises. Berks County we talked previously before about some of their surprises with 2 of their incumbent commissioners losing. There's a few other surprises that you talked about in Allegheny County that you wrote about on your website, and maybe a few in Philly. Talk to me about what trend you're seeing here with some of these primary results.
It's interesting that, I guess, of course, it depends on the voter turnout in each area of the state, because some counties saw an increase in voter turnout, and that's actually the case in Philadelphia, where there was a higher voter turnout in previous off-year elections, which, interestingly enough, that was the case. So a couple long-term incumbents went down in Philadelphia. You had the sheriff who was seeking a 3rd term, Jewel Williams. He was an embattled candidate. He has 3 different sexual assault claims against him. 2 of them were settled already. And he ran. He still ran. He was beat by a former police officer, Rochelle Bilal. She is the president of the Guardian Civic League in Philadelphia, and also, I believe, a secretary of the local NAACP chapter there. She won by a pretty big margin. Williams didn't receive the party endorsement. It was revoked. Originally, it was given to him. A lot of backlash. Multiple elected officials have actually called for Williams to resign due to the sexual assault claims. He did not step down, but he was still a wounded candidate, certainly. Bilal won by a pretty substantial margin, which is a credit to her. And then Janie Blackwell, who's a councilwoman in West Philadelphia. She held the seat since the mid-'90s or early '90s. Before that, her husband held the seat from the mid-'70s till then. So it was 45 years of the same last name running that district. Her husband has since passed away. She was upset by a more progressive candidate.
Interesting.
So, and Bilal was also a more progressive candidate. But having said that, most of the other races in Philadelphia were not progressive candidates winning those races. It was actually more par for the course. They were the two big stories in Philly. Allegheny County was a bigger story for the more left-leaning candidates, where John DeFazio, an Allegheny councilman at large, lost to Bethany Hallam, who was a young candidate. DeFazio was an old labor Democrat. He had the party endorsement. Hallam ran without the party endorsement. More progressive campaign. One of our first big issues was talking about LGBT conversion therapy ban in Allegheny County. And she ended up winning by a decent margin. Not a huge margin, but it wasn't like neck and neck the whole night. She ended up winning that race. And then also in Allegheny County, Pittsburgh City Council, you had two different incumbents lose. One was Darlene Harris, who lost to a Democrat, Bobby Wilson, who again, he ran without the party endorsement, but he still won. So it was, and there was also another race. Liv Bennett, another Democrat, also upset another incumbent in Pittsburgh City Council, Allegheny County Council, where there was three different races out there where the party candidate, the endorsed candidate, and the incumbent lost to more, and they were all more progressive candidates that ended up winning those races.
So when you look at that, and then we're looking at 2020 next year, and obviously a ton of candidates have come through the state. Joe Biden, in many ways, the former vice president, the standard bearer. But now we're looking at situations where incumbents have been upset by more progressive candidates. Do you think that comes to bear in 2020?
It's something to certainly keep an eye on. I think we're a little too far out right now to determine if that's going to be the case, but let's not forget Bernie Sanders, who a year or two before that 2016 primary, how many Pennsylvania voters were familiar with him? He got 44% of the vote against Hillary Clinton. A woman, Clinton last name, that was well known in Pennsylvania for decades. And her husband, and President Bill Clinton won the state twice. And he had that type of uprising. So it's going to be interesting to see if more progressive candidates are able to be successful. You'd imagine the more progressive candidates will do well in the more urban areas, your Philadelphias, your Pittsburghs. We'll have to see how they do in the more of the old school Democrat, maybe the conservative, the moderate Democrat areas. Then I don't know how they're going to fare there, but at least there's certain parts of the state where you can see they're definitely gaining momentum. Sure.
It'll be interesting to pay attention to as we move forward then. John, thank you for taking the time and breaking down these elections for us.
As always, Sam, I like coming on.
It is always our pleasure. Thank you. So my thanks to John for being here again, and don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues, and again, my thanks to John Cole. It's always a pleasure having him on the program, breaking down the latest in our political landscape. We're going to close the program a little bit differently tonight. See, 10 years ago, I crossed the stage at the Farrell Center at Baylor University and received my first post-secondary degree. 8 years ago, I received my academic hood upon the completion of my graduate school requirements. And this last week, I donned that academic regalia for the first time since, as I attended as a faculty member the commencement ceremonies at Northampton Community College and saw a number of my students graduate. And let me tell you, it is a much greater honor being among the faculty watching your students graduate than graduating yourself. And so my congratulations to not just those students, but to all of the students in Northampton Community College's class of 2019. And to all the college graduates at various colleges and universities across our country. Some words of advice as you now enter into the real world. Remember what you've accomplished. You accomplished this through hard work. You accomplished this through long nights that now pay off. But also remember that the things that you do, and even the people you know, will never make you who you are. Your success was driven by your identity, your passions, your priorities. That's what drove those long nights. That's what drove all the difficult decisions you had to make. And that's what ultimately drove you to crossing that stage and earning your diploma. We couldn't be more proud of you. And as you now enter the real world, remember, find your passion, find your priorities, be in touch with your identity. It's not about the people around you. It's not about the things that you do. But at the end of the day, who you are will determine the significance of every relationship that you have and the success of everything that you do. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't give an in-studio, on-air shout-out to my students who crossed that stage last night. And so this is for all of you. Shauna Campanero, Chris Jacobson, Jayla Johnson, Elise Klein, Oyen Olikoya, Nicole Schmidt, Thaddeus Vines, and Kelsey Walter. It's been a privilege having you in class and working with you, and I couldn't be more proud of you. I wish you all the best as you move on, either to your four-year school or into the workforce. And please do keep in touch and keep us apprised of your success. So to those students, to the entire graduating class of Northampton Community College, and to college graduates everywhere, congratulations. That is all the time we have tonight. Again, my thanks to John Cole for joining us. And tune in again next week as we unpack another issue. In the meantime, you can continue this conversation online. Just use the hashtag #FaceTheIssues. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.